My name is Michael S. Seaver, and you're listening to Equal Chance to Be Unequal, my podcast about unlocking human potential through helping people disconnected from their purpose uncover and live their purpose. This is episode 3, How to Uncover Your Life's Purpose. What I'd like to do in today's podcast is look through just probably 2 or 3 changes or advances that I'm seeing happen in society. I'm guessing as I go through the 3 things that I'd like to talk about, there's probably a few that you would like to add in that are forcing the need for each of us to actively consider what is our life's missions, what is our life's purpose, why do we do what we do, really diving deep down into making sure that we have a really thorough understanding of who we are and how we're going to make an impact on and drive a legacy in our community in some meaningful way. I'll walk you step by step through the various things that I do with executives around the nation to make sure that we've defined their brand and their purpose appropriately. And then I'll talk through 8 major things that I utilize to make sure that every executive that I serve is doing a great job of making really, really tough decisions, taking into consideration a variety of factors. And then we'll close out today's podcast with a look at some of the things that you can do to immediately take some of the things you learned and move them straight into action. So one of the major societal advances or changes that I'm seeing, I'm guessing you're seeing it too, is this whole idea of a move away from traditional corporate organizational hierarchical models into far more entrepreneurial, creative, innovative settings. And so it's a very, very interesting move and transition. I'm a very big fan of it, having made the transition myself just about 3-4 years ago. In Metro Phoenix, I live in Metro Phoenix. Arizona obviously is a very, very hot and growing place when it comes to entrepreneurship. As examples, Arizona State University has various startup accelerators. There are groups like Seed Spot, which I've been engaged with multiple times in our past. I've also done some work with Social Venture Partners, the Center for Entrepreneurial Innovation, groups like the Armory, #YesPhoenix, Galvanize, which is in multiple places around the United States. Startup Grind. There are many others that exist, definitely in Arizona, but also in various places wherever you're listening in. So if there's one thing that will really help you to understand your purpose is try to engage some sort of an incubator or accelerator or some sort of an organization that's looking at these things a bit differently. It will really help you to learn about yourself in a way that you're not going to be able to learn through traditional hierarchical structures and systems. So I'm just a really big believer that entrepreneurship or things associated with it are very, very tremendous self-discovery tools. I've seen a lot of people go through the process of launching or starting businesses, and they've done tremendous work with overcoming their fears, building a deeper level of emotional intelligence, and being very empathetic for the potential users of their product or service. And then, of course, doing a very good job of achieving some really major goals. And so another thing here that's also helping this push is the democratization of information. I've been engaged with the University of Illinois in their MBA program for a number of years, and of course with Arizona State University locally. And both schools in some capacity are offering their MBAs, or at least one of their MBAs, free of charge. They probably have some small fees and things associated with it, but for the most part, the average person doesn't have to pay $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 in order to garner information through rote memorization. Right? We've moved to a society where it's far better to learn experientially, to be very, very immersively put into an environment where we can impact our community roughly at the same time as learning. Just sitting and listening to lecture repeatedly is not a very, very effective means of learning today as it may have been, let's say, 50, 60, 70 years ago. So thankfully, entrepreneurship is creating the tools by which we can move away from those old kind of hierarchical models into newer models that are allowing for humans to learn far more quickly and in a way that really helps them to uncover unique characteristics within themselves. Now, the second thing that I'm seeing change in society is that we are now, probably because of entrepreneurship, we are far more open to talking about our mistakes. And so a couple years back, I was introduced to Brene Brown, her book, Daring Greatly. She has a number of TED Talks, but when she started talking about vulnerability and how we're all trying to essentially avoid shame, it really, really did help me to understand that it's okay to learn through our mistakes, and it's okay to fail and fail forward and to really learn from those things. I'm just thankful that we're in an environment that we're finally empathetic enough to see that all persons are going to have challenges in some context, but we need to be there to help them through that. So if you do decide to continue in some sort of a full-time job, I think you're probably also seeing that recruiters are far more accepting of shorter employment cycles. And so there is an acceptance in traditional hierarchical models where people making mistakes or going from one job to the next more rapidly is now more accepted than it might have been 10 plus years ago, which is fantastic for us. So another thing here that I would like for you to consider is Google X, the director of that particular program. His name is Astro Teller. He has a great TED Talk, I think from about 1.5 years or 2 years ago, where he talks an awful lot about how their organization celebrates mistakes. And so when they have some sort of a big failure that occurs within Google X, they throw parties. They do unique things to help celebrate the fact that there were very significant learnings through the process of making that mistake. And I would encourage you to think about how can you celebrate your own mistakes and think about the lessons that you learned through that to make sure that you're moving closer to your life's purpose moving forward. I've heard it said one way or the other that your best teacher is your last mistake. And so if you can move away from society's norms that say that you have to continually compare yourself to other people, and you can really just be introspective enough to compare yourself to who you were yesterday or potentially in the last month, I think you're going to be in a much, much better place. And so what I ask many of my clients to do is to use tools like the 5-minute journal or similar and track their behavior, their emotions, and their wins, and kind of track almost like a positive psychology for about 30 days. And then on the 31st day or the first of the month, then we can look back at any patterns or themes that existed throughout that month that would then help to shape what we do in the next month. So it's really important that we look for those patterns and themes in the person's behavior or in what the universe was sending our way to make sure that we take the appropriate action moving forward to get us one step closer to our life's purpose. So a couple years back, I partnered with Financial Executives International and with Robert Half to publish a white paper called Creating a Leadership Pipeline. And it was this idea that how do we take knowledge that exists with traditional baby boomer CFOs and VPs of finance and more experienced finance professionals? How do we transfer knowledge down to the younger generation of millennials who are just coming out of college or taking roles within these larger corporations? And after all the research and conversation and interviews that we did, what it came back was that the most valuable route was going to be to set up very structured mentorship and reverse mentorship systems inside of businesses, because all persons really do have a desire for continual learning. But we have found that millennials actually have this desire to receive continual feedback, right? One-to-one feedback that can come from a mentor or a boss. They want that on a very recurrent basis. And so mentorship and reverse mentorship, creating those structures and systems and relationships can be probably one of the most effective learning methodologies because it allows for a more senior executive to help a younger finance professional or other person through any mistakes that he or she may make. Now, the third societal adjustment that I'm seeing, you're probably seeing it too, is this idea of individuality. And what I mean by that is that for the first time in history, right, Barack Obama was the first African-American president of the United States. More recently, we had a female, Hillary Clinton, being actively considered for president, and that was fantastic. We're seeing this massive increase in acceptance of folks from the LGBTQ community. There's a big move in Arizona where I live to kind of bring in and accept folks from the Hispanic community, because as of today, about 58% of Arizona is Caucasian, about 29% is Hispanic, but that number is going to rapidly adjust or change in the next 10 years. So it's very, we have to be very cognizant of the very unique things that are people from very, very diverse and different ethnicities and backgrounds, because the things that each person can bring to the table, the individuality, the individual purpose that he or she has, is very, very critical to relationships and to businesses growing and developing and to communities just thriving in general. So millennials, specifically those born between 1980 and the year 2000, they are already the largest percentage of the American workforce, but by 2025, they are going to be roughly 75% of the American workforce. And it is just important to understand that they are very much nonconformists, that they do have very high expectations, that they are very socially conscious. And as more experienced generations like to say, they do have a higher level of self-regard or narcissism. And that's true. There's some psychology studies to prove that. But that's actually more a function of where they're at in life, the stage that they're at in life, basically being in their 20s. And there's so many things changing in society that they're just trying really hard to get caught up to where their parents were. So at some point in the next 5 to 10 years, many of those millennials will begin to settle into society the same way that Generation X or the baby boomers did. So they don't necessarily have a higher level of self-regard or narcissism than a previous generation. It just happens that it's a little bit higher because of the stage that they're at in life. And so I'm also a big fan of the quote, you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And so if you think about taking some time to write down who those 5 people are, and then you really start to think about them and why do you like them and what are the things that make those individuals unique, you're probably going to find that all 5 of them, and then even adding yourself to the list, they're all going to be pretty different. And that uniqueness, that individuality is really, really critical and key, because the diversity in that group is what allows for the whole to be better. So along these same lines around individuality, we're also seeing this capacity for individuals, folks like you, folks like me, anybody else, have the capacity to really change how a business is done. And so for a very long time, obviously cash has been king, but we're moving to a society where cash really isn't the 21st century currency. How you have the ability to have someone else give you his or her attention, like that's the real currency, right? Because what I found out is that HubSpot had done some work in 2015, in that 84% of millennials don't believe or trust traditional corporate push marketing. So the typical advertisements and things that you're seeing on television and via the internet, the average millennial doesn't believe it. They don't find it to be authentic, and they don't find it to be honest, and they don't find it to be true. So we're moving to a place where younger persons have a much, much bigger preference for pull marketing, right? They want to go to their friends to understand which dentist or which restaurant or which service provider they're using, and they want to go based on trust of that, not necessarily something that they're seeing on the television or in the World Wide Web in some sort of an advertisement or banner ad. They just don't believe that the same way that they believe a friend who has experienced the service said that it was good, and now we want to use that today. So that's pull marketing. So as we're going through this process, we're moving to a place of, instead of creating advertisements that now go out to customers or clients or people in the community, we're moving to a place where we have to document our journeys, not create them, not create content. If we document our journey, it's very authentic, it's very true. We're not simply creating something to try to sell somebody something. So we're moving to a place where individuality allows for us to be far more authentic. We get to document our journey, show the ups and downs, and move to a place where we can truly uncover our life's purpose without the influence of everybody just trying to make money just to make money. We're trying to take care of the triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit, all at the same time. Now, my gut tells me that there are other things that you're seeing technology-wise, or other small adjustments that you're seeing happen in society. You can go ahead and think about those as you wish. I'm just a big fan of those 3, right? Entrepreneurship, us being way more open to making mistakes. And this idea is that every single person is an individual, and we now have the structures and systems in our society that allow for us to express that individuality very meaningfully. So when we think about our personal brands, right, and uncovering that life's purpose, the overarching process that I utilize with my clients takes into consideration a lot of different things that I've learned probably over the last decade. And one of the things that really struck me over the last few years was Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which was published in 1949. And so there are some elements of Campbell's work in the process that I'm about to describe to you. So obviously the step-by-step process that I utilize is very long, but the first few steps I think are really critical for you all to understand. So what I'm looking for really overarching is, number one, well, let's take a look at this person's behavioral profile, which I get through something called the trimetrics assessment, which is a person's DISC, right? The how and the what of communication. And then it's his or her motivators, why they do what they do. And then it also looks at emotional intelligence. So it's a very, very robust report looking at emotional intelligence. So first, I want to know their behavioral profile, basically their DISC. Number two, I want to know what motivates them, right? So from the trimetrics, the motivators piece. Number 3 is I want to know a little bit about his or her value structure and some of the things that shaped his or her life to get to the values that he or she now has. And then 4th, I put the person through a Q&A process, really looking hard at their past, their present today, and the future that they really would like to create ideally. And I'll go through each of those sections here in a minute. So again, in order for me to collect the appropriate data, I'm looking for the behavioral profile, what motivates the person, his or her values, and then I'm doing a Q&A process to really understand the past, the present, and the future. So after I've collected all of that data, I now distill that back into essentially probably 6 to 10 really significant patterns or themes that have happened recurrently to that person in his or her life. And what we do with those patterns or themes is the client and I, we sit down and we want to write 3 guiding statements out of that time. And so we write an intention statement, which is essentially a personal mission. We then write an ambition statement, which is essentially goals for 3 to 5 years, depending on the individual's timeline. And then we write a value proposition statement, which is what many people refer to as a personal brand. And so once we have the Q&A process done, we look for those patterns and themes, and then we write those 3 guiding statements. Then we can go through and start to adjust the habits and the rituals and the daily things that the person is doing to go towards the goals that they're creating. So the thing that I love about Joseph Campbell's work is that we see a lot of that work, the hero's journey, in movies, because many movies that you watch through television or at a movie theater or through Netflix or Hulu or something, what you're always seeing is that at some point at the beginning of the movie, the good guy fights the bad guy, and the bad guy wins. So then the good guy falls down to some version of him or herself, and the rest of the movie is spent kind of climbing back up to the point where the good guy can fight the bad guy a second time. And so, of course, always in this time, the good guy wins the fight and then ascends to a higher level or being of him or herself. Now, the trick is that every single human on the planet goes through this exact same process multiple times in his or her life. But for some reason, our society hasn't allowed for us to accept how this process or our mistakes or our lessons learned can guide us to find our life's mission. And to me, that's always really, really odd that we do that. We idolize, athletes and celebrities and people in government, but everything that they're going through in life is no different than the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. So it's up to us to uncover those things for ourselves and truly live our purpose in a very, very meaningful way. So my goal through explaining this high-level process to you is just to remind you that there's nothing stopping you from being the CEO of your name, Inc., or from being, your own name.com, right? Whatever that is. So I'm just a big believer that every organization that you've ever engaged with has a mission, it has goals, it has a value proposition. I'm simply suggesting that you as a person should have those exact same things for yourself. Because to me, success is not financial attainment, although that's meaningful and nice in our society in the short term. Success is actually the percentage of the day you spend living your life's mission. And that to me is probably the most critical aspect, right? When you look at Gallup and their engagement statistics, only 33% of the American workforce likes their work. And internationally, according to Gallup, only 13% of the global workforce likes their work. So the structures and systems we've created in society don't lead to very fulfilling lives. And so this constant focus on success, fame, power, money, all these things, they don't lead to happiness. But what really does is the percent of your day that is you living your life's purpose and your life's mission. So that's what we really want each of you to do, is to stay focused in on finding ways to do that. So the behavioral profile, let's take a look at the behavioral profile piece that I was just referencing a second ago. So again, I used the DISC assessment through a company in North Scottsdale called TTI Success Insights. And I look at communication, right, as the how and the what and the when of what you do and why you do and what you do it. Okay, so when you do what you do, basically. And so there are obviously 4 different quadrants here to look at. I can't go into them in too much depth, but it's really important just to understand that there are kind of 2 dichotomies, right? You're either you're on the scale of being on the far left-hand side an introvert, or on the far right-hand side being an extrovert, or maybe at the bottom you're very, very people-oriented, or maybe towards the top you're very task-oriented. And with each of these profiles, we have to be very, very cognizant of what it is that they're attempting to do, what their default emotion is, what is their default fear, what is their default negotiation or conflict style. So when I know something about a person's DISC profile, I can automatically be aware of or understand what might be the best opportunity or the best job or the best career or purpose for them to consider, because there's underlying factors about their default emotions or the default fears that I can then help them confront. So it's really important that once we know what those fears are, we can then create structures and systems for those persons to confront those fears in a very, very meaningful way to get them step by step closer to their life's mission. So I'll give you a quick example. So a person who is a D on the DISC profile, right, they have a high D, meaning that they like to solve problems and challenges on their own, not via group consensus, but on their own and relatively quickly. They have a very, very distinct fear of loss of control, of vulnerability, or of being taken advantage of. And so we have to constantly create solutions and systems around that person that, depending on what they want to do to grow, is that they have to offer up more vulnerabilities of themselves, or they have to be willing to delegate more control to other people, or they have to be willing to be taken advantage of in the short term to see that it's not that big of a deal and they continue to grow to what they want. But these folks are extroverted. They're very task-oriented. They view the environment around them themselves unfavorably. So we have to really truly dive into finding out what are the triggers that are going to want to make them default to a specific emotion. And for them, it's anger. So when they're stressed or when they're having an issue with something, the way that you can tell that they're stressed or struggling is that they're going to default to emotionally behaving back at you with anger. So it's just critical to be aware of this. Because they're going to want to, in negotiation, compete. They're going to want to do the win-lose scenario. They're going to want to get as much as they can from you in that. So they're definitely not about win-win. They're definitely about win-lose, and doing everything that they can to stay in control, to stay dictatorial, to stay authoritarian in some context. So once we know these things about an individual, and again, we could talk about the I, S, and C too, it's just important to understand that these thinking and behavioral styles do well in certain types of roles in traditional systems or potentially inside startups. So I'm really looking at a person's DISC profile or their behavioral profile in a very meaningful way to make sure that they're not trying to do tasks that are going to put them in a place to not operate from a place of strengths. We want them to operate from a place of strengths so that we can go deep and help them confront those fears in a very meaningful way. So the second thing that I get to learn about a person from their trimetrics profile is their motivators. And so this is called the 12 driving forces from TTI. And this is really a good hard look at why you do what you do. And so there are 6 kind of major motivators, and then they're kind of diametrically opposed poles on either side of those. And the 6 major motivators are, number 1, knowledge, number 2, utility, number 3, surroundings, what surrounds a person. Number 4 is how we interact with others. 5 is how we deal with power. And number 6 is methodologies and what kind of systems do we like to function in. So as an example, if you have a person that happens to be on the utility scale, right, very, very resourceful, they're very much driven by practical results. They want to maximize efficiency and choices. They're really driven by ROI. They really want to make sure that they're using their time, their talent, their energy, and their resources really effectively. They really want to produce a lot of wealth. So if you have a person who's very high resourceful, and so they want wealth, they want to be able to be in power roles, they're going to really struggle working for $50,000 a year, being the chief operations officer of a not-for-profit. So it's very easy to see that if a person is heavily motivated by money, but they're in a work environment that doesn't allow them to create it, it's going to be very tough for them to stay motivated or to want to be engaged by that workplace. Now, similarly, if a person under number 4, others, is really, really altruistic, they're very, very interested in just purely doing things for the benefit of other people. They're very much socially conscious, socially minded, definitely want to take care of other people. But if you put them into a role that requires them to lead very large groups, only focus in on profit, have to hire and fire people really, really quickly and not get to know them, that is going to be a very disengaging environment for that person. So just critical to understand that if a person has high altruism, but some of the other motivators don't line up with wealth production, they're not going to be in a good place in trying to run a larger business. I'll give you one more example. Under the 6th methodologies version, so if you have a person who is highly receptive, right, these receptive folks are really, really driven by new ideas, new methods, new opportunities, very, very entrepreneurial, creative, innovative thinking. If you put these people inside of, let's say, a governmental entity and ask them to work in a very regimented way where they have to punch in at the same time, punch out for lunch, punch back in after lunch, punch out at 5 o'clock every single night, and they don't have really a lot of capacity to try new things, to take risks, to meet new people really recurrently, they're going to be really, really disengaged. And so if the motivator of the person doesn't line up with the value proposition or the things that are set up well inside the company or the organization, we can see why Gallup has found that only 33 or 34% of the American workforce likes their job, because many people, either their DISC profile or their motivators, are not lined up with what is required for the role inside the organization that they're working for. So it's really critical that we think about this at depth, and this is why I go this deep with executives, is that if we want to know a person's life's purpose, we have to look at not only the how and the what of communication, the DISC, but the why, which is the motivators piece. Now, the third thing that I'm looking at, mentioned just a few minutes ago, is this idea of personal values. So similar to TTI's motivators assessment, this is really something that's truly imperative to you personally. And I see this coming from both the nature and nurture sides of who you are. So normally when I'm working with executives, I will give them a list of, let's say, 35 or 40 values, and I will ask them to circle 10. And then after they've taken that time to circle 10, I will then ask them to put a star next to the top 5 that are the most important to them. So then they whittle their list from 10 back down to 5. And then after they feel good about those 5, I ask them to do that exercise one more time and put a second star next to the top 3. And so when we can get down to, of let's say 35 or 40 values, we can narrow them down to, let's say, the top 3. Now we know how a person really truly wants to distribute his or her time, things that are really truly important to him or her. So important that we think about those values in a meaningful way too. If a person does value balance, great, we need to find balance in that person's life through work and professional pursuits. Maybe they value honesty. And so what do we do to focus in on making sure that they're surrounded by people personally and professionally that are very honest? Or maybe the person values spirituality. And so have we created structures and systems on a week-to-week basis that allow that person to remain spiritual through traditional religious means, or through things like yoga or Eastern methodologies when it comes to spirituality? They get to pick, but we want to make sure that those structures and systems exist day to day. Now, there are free resources on the web that can help you with this, but just something to consider as you're thinking about how to uncover your purpose. We would want to look hard at what you value and what you're willing to spend time on. So a few minutes ago, I suggested that there were a series of questions that I like to be able to ask people to really thoroughly understand the patterns that have come from their life, what has shaped them to be who they are today. So I put them through a series of questions about their past, their present, and their future. So I'll read the past questions to you just so that you know what they are. But really important to just understand that what we can do with these is that they seem a little bit out there, like why would you ask these questions? But when a person gives his or her response, undoubtedly what comes out of it is a very, very defined or specific pattern. So question 1, what is your favorite childhood memory? Question 2, what is the most difficult experience you've had in your life? Number 3, what was the most eye-opening or transformative experience you had while traveling nationally or internationally? 4, what's the favorite activity you used to do in your free time? 5, have there ever been philanthropic causes or other causes that you've supported? 6, what are or what is the most important lesson or lessons that you've learned? Next is what perceived problems or issues or challenges occurred repeatedly. And the last, has there been any type of a transcending legacy that you've always wanted to leave? So as I'm asking these questions, right, it normally takes about an hour to an hour and a half to look through and get the responses to these, is I'm beginning to look through these responses to really hone in on the challenges that the person has had. So the challenges that happen in the very first phase of your life oftentimes become very defining after we get past age 30, and then there's another period after we hit age 50. So it's just important to recognize that these questions are set up very specifically to identify the challenge that recurred in the person's life, the lesson that they learned in overcoming that challenge, and then any particular cause, philanthropically, volunteerism, or something that they gave time back to. Really important to identify those three things from that process. So after we've done the past, then I want to move forward to today and really focus in on things that are happening presently for the person. And so what I'm doing here is asking a series of questions around when they are in their work environment, what are, number one, the top 3 professional interests that they have, the things that they do at their office that really, really are interesting to them that they wish they could spend more time on, but maybe they don't. I then ask questions about, this seems a bit logistic, but it's an important thing because of the amount of time that he or she may spend in a car. I ask them questions about the location of their office. I ask them questions about the total rewards or total compensation package he or she has today. I ask questions about the 3 to 5 tasks that he or she spends the most time on, right or wrong, right? Because there may be some opportunity for movement there. But what are the tasks that they do day to day? And oftentimes you're going to see a gap between their professional interests and their tasks, the things that they have to do day to day. And that gives me a little bit of room to figure out what can I help them do next that's meaningful for them. Another question I ask them about is their responsibility level. How many people report to them? What's the size of their budget? What's their title? Just trying to get an understanding of how important they are within the organization and if they desire to be there or maybe they would like something else. Now, I also ask about their growth potential, right? Do they have the capacity in the next couple of years to be able to grow into higher roles inside the business, and is that favorable for them? And then, of course, I do look over any other personality inventories like the trimetrics if they have them or would like to show them to me, because maybe there's some patterns or themes that exist throughout those inventories that will help me to convince the person that the best next step is to go down a specific path that I see for them. So again, at the present, we're just looking at things as they stand today. So then the questions about the future are quite similar. And now we're choosing a date 3 to 5 years into the future. So we're setting a specific date whereby when we would hope to achieve some pretty big goals. And we're saying, hey, by this particular date, here is the location of my ideal office. Here is my ideal total compensation or total rewards package. Here are the daily tasks that I would like. This is the responsibility that I would have. Here is the growth potential I would have inside this new organization or my own business. Here is what I would expect in terms of more time with my family or health or well-being or travel or vacation. Giving them something to kind of positive psychology look forward to. So what we've done is we've identified from the past questions the challenges that they endured and the ways that they might have overcome those challenges, set a very, very solid foundation with who they are today in the present by figuring out what do they have today that's good or bad. And then we looked 3 to 5 years into the future and said, okay, let's ask those same questions again and identify what's the gap that exists between today and where you want to be 3 to 5 years from now. So that gives us some really, really solid information to create basically a gap analysis between what they are and what they would like to become. And we can set up very, very defined personal and professional goals based on those gaps to make sure that we're driving them towards what they want next. So after we've gone through that Q&A process, right, we've looked at their DISC, we've looked at their motivators, we've looked at their values, and we've now got some great Q&A about their past, present, and future. We've now got some really good material to find those patterns and themes that I talked about at the beginning of the podcast. So typically what I'm looking for is 6 to 8 themes for the person, and we can begin to turn those themes into those 3 guiding statements that I had referenced earlier as well. So the first thing that we're looking for is their intention statement, right? What do they intend to be? What's the thing that they intend to provide to this planet? And so a lot of people refer to this as a mission statement. As I mentioned earlier, every organization that you've worked for probably has a mission statement. I'm just advocating that you as an individual have one so that when you have to make really tough choices in life, you've got a guiding star that you can fall back on that can help you make those choices. So I'm of the belief that an intention statement is a never-changing purpose for a person. It is why he or she exists. I typically write this with the person, and it's about one sentence, probably 10 to 15 words. It's very simple. It should be something that he or she is able to repeat without anybody else being around. It just flows right off the tip of their tongue. So we want to make sure that they have that guiding star, that mission. Now, there are tools that you can find online that help with this, but I've got hundreds of examples that I can share with clients to make sure that they feel super comfortable with writing this based on other executives who are in kind of a similar sphere, what they've written, what might feel good to that person, just to get some brainstorming going. If you ever wanted to, you could go to missionstatements.com and see the Fortune 500 companies and all of their mission statements if you were looking for additional language to help you with that. But there are quite a few resources and tools available that can support you through saying, here is my intention, this is how I am going to change the world, or this is why I exist, just in one sentence. So the second statement that we're really looking to write is what I call an ambition statement. And this is what I would kind of equate to a vision statement that many corporations have, and many corporations will set up a 3 to 5 year vision. And so what we're doing is setting 3 to 5 year goals for a person. And I've used the SMART methodology. I've used the 4 disciplines of execution methodology. You get to pick what is most important to you, or what's best for the person that you're working with, or maybe could provide support to. But really, this is setting really specific personal and professional goals, right? With this idea of that we have to move from X to Y by a specific date. So everything is very, very specific. It's very measurable. It's very action-based. It's very realistic. It's very timely. We're doing everything that we can to make it obvious that the person has achieved the goals and then can celebrate and reward themselves for doing that. So again, ambition is just essentially a vision statement. It's 3 to 5 year goals. I'm trying to set at least 3 personal and or professional goals for the person. I've worked with folks that said, I want to start a family, or I want to get married, or I want to lose 20 pounds, or I want to run a marathon, or I want to travel to a different country in Europe, or they want to get promoted to be CEO inside their company, or they want to win a local or national award, or they want to help their children become something that they wanted them to become, or play football or play sports or something. So the goals can be virtually limitless. It's something that has to be really super important to you and your family, and to make sure that it aligns with your intention is really, really critical. It's helped to make sure that your ambition aligns with your intention, is doing the best that it can to help those people around you. So the third statement, of course, is the value proposition statement. Many people in our society refer to this as a personal brand. So this, to me, is very simple in that through those 6 to 8 patterns and themes that I referenced earlier, this really does help to make sure that we are really clearly identifying how you're different in the marketplace and what makes you unique. Now, through those patterns and themes, I've got a ton of material that I can help to write 3 to 5 sentences that can be utilized in a wide variety of ways out in the marketplace. But we want to write a statement, right? A paragraph that says, here is this person's brand, how they're different, and how they're unique. So a value proposition is a very important statement, especially in our society, because if you want to know or uncover your life's purpose, there has to be something very unique about you that we can continue to sell in the marketplace. Whether you're staying inside of a corporate entity, whether you're starting your own business or doing something entrepreneurial, we have to be great at understanding what makes you different to make sure that people understand that as well. So once we have gotten together the intention and the ambition and the value proposition, what we're really looking to do is put them together basically into one document that the person can look at really recurrently. In some cases, I've seen clients use this document and these statements as the background on their phone. Sometimes they'll write them down, or they'll print them out and they'll carry them in a briefcase or in a purse. They'll find different ways to maybe create some sort of a collage somewhere in their house or their office, and they'll put it somewhere where it's very, very obvious and they see it day to day. But we just really want to make sure that we take all of this content and information and distill it back down to just a couple of statements and that we have those statements in a very easily identifiable place so that they're easy to then think about on a day-to-day basis and or share with others, so that others then help to hold us accountable to make sure that our goals are achieved, or that we're living our brand, or that we're working diligently daily towards uncovering whatever that purpose might be. So those are, I think, are pretty important. So then once we have those statements, and now we're working day by day to implement them in our lives, and helping to really thoroughly uncover what that purpose is, or living it on a day-to-day, which is great. So let's assume that now you're a couple months down the road and you're having to make pretty tough decisions. And so what we're really looking for here is, how do we use some of the things we just discussed in the decision-making process, so we don't make decisions just purely based on data, or we don't make decisions just based on intuition or our gut. We want to take all of those things into consideration to make sure we're making a both intuitive and kind of factual decision, to make sure that we don't regret it at some point down the road. So when we first started the podcast, I mentioned that I was going to talk about the 8 various things to do to make decisions. And I think my very first podcast dove into these things in a little bit more depth, but I'll just go through them here just so that you have them. But it is important to basically develop some sort of a spreadsheet or some sort of a document that these 8 things are on, like, the y-axis, and whatever project, job, or opportunity that you have is somewhere on the x-axis, so you can do a side-by-side comparison of these 8 things. So the first thing is the communication or behavioral profile, which is the DISC. So if you know what your DISC scores are, and you compare one job or one opportunity against the next, which one is going to allow you to communicate the most authentically or the most naturally, because likely one will, probably a little bit more than the other. And it's important to allow for your most natural communication to happen on a day-to-day basis. Number 2 is the motivators, which I talked about a few different examples a few minutes ago. It is really important to select an opportunity that allows you to use your motivators more so than not. Because if you're in a not-for-profit role, but yet you're really heavily motivated by money, it'll be very, very difficult for you to stay engaged and happy inside that role. So if you're comparing 2 opportunities or 2 projects side by side, and one allows you to use your motivators more daily, I would encourage you to go more towards that role than any other. Number 3, values, right? Going back to that list of, let's say, 40 values and narrowing it back down to 3 to 5. We want to make sure that we have opportunities where our personal values align with the core values of the organization or business that we're considering partnering with or working in. If your core values do not line up with the organization's values, it is likely not going to be a long-term fit, and you might stay there for 12, 18, or 24 months just to make ends meet or to move your career forward a little bit. But the probability of you staying there long-term is very, very slim. So it's very important that your values match up with the core values of the organization. We just talked about the intention statement, and so if you have your intention statement written down on the y-axis and you say, here's my mission, and then you look at the opportunities in front of you, does your mission align with either of the opportunities and that company's mission? If it does, great. You're going to be far more engaged by doing the work and or want to go above and beyond or go the extra mile to be able to deliver to them what they need. You're going to be far happier and engaged in your work. Number 5 is ambition, your ambition statement. So if you have these 3 to 5 year goals that you have set up, how does this project or opportunity or job, how does it help you achieve any of those goals, any of those ambition statement goals? And if it does, great, continue to work down that road so that you can get much, much closer to the achievement of those goals. But if the job or the opportunity does not line up with the goals that you have set for yourself or in no way helps you to get there, it might be interesting for you to look at something else to do in the short term, because that might not lead you to where you want to go. 6 is the value proposition, which we just talked about being the personal brand. So if your value proposition is allowed to be on display in any opportunity that comes your way, that's fantastic. But if you're not going to be allowed to behave the way that you want to or display your personal brand inside of one of the opportunities or jobs, again, it's going to be just a little bit more difficult for you to want to stay engaged with that company. So I'm always looking for fit between the person's personal brand or value proposition and one of the opportunities he or she has in front of him or her. Number 7 is a little bit more tangible, really looking at those advantages and disadvantages of the role. So when I went back to the present and future questions, really looking for things about location of the office and total reward structures, tasks on a day-to-day basis, growth potential, I'm really looking to make sure that one of the 2 opportunities or 3 opportunities that you have allows for you to fulfill and move towards your future ideal version of yourself. So that, do you have the right compensation, or do you have a shorter drive to work, or is your new job within a city that really means something to you, where you can grow and develop as a person? So really looking at some of those really tactical things about the 2 opportunities or 3 opportunities to make sure that they're aligning with your mission, but also moving you towards your goals far more quickly. And then the 8th thing that I'm always looking for is that all humans really love growth. So I'm really looking for, say, okay, what is it that we're expecting to get out of this next move from a learning standpoint or a growth standpoint? Because I want people to be working towards a much longer term goal for themselves. And so what is it that this next opportunity provides in expected learning or growth that gets him or her much closer to that longer term goal? And so always looking at, is there a potential mentor inside the business? Is there going to be a board member that he or she can engage with? Will there be some sort of reverse mentorship or mentorship offered to him or her? Are there, traditional learning opportunities inside where an executive can get a certificate of some sort? Looking at all of the various things that add value to that individual's life to make sure that he or she is growing to the highest and best version of him or herself, because that's really where that life's purpose lives or is. So now that we've somewhat said, okay, here's the intention, the ambition, the value proposition, and here are kind of 8 decision factors that we can utilize to make sure that we're moving in the appropriate direction, I want to take action on a couple of things, right? What are the things that we can then move towards that help us move to action, take action? So a couple of really basic things for each of you to consider. First and foremost is that as soon as you have these statements written about yourself, it's very easy to put them into your resume, cover letter, interview responses, LinkedIn, and other social media profiles. There is obviously a ton of space in each of these documents or electronic places to be able to include this information very meaningfully, so that what is happening is that when people look at you on paper, they look at you online, or they look at you in person, they're getting the same message across all of those places. And if you really want people to know your purpose, go through this process, but then make sure that you're then sharing it very consistently and branding yourself consistently through a variety of means. So second thing here, I look at this and say, okay, we really want to be great at, if we want to uncover and live our purpose, we want to be great at tailoring our communication. And so tailoring communication to me is really making sure that you understand your own DISC profile, but then you have a capacity to understand and recognize verbal and nonverbal cues in other persons, so that you then know when to share your life's purpose with them. So I'm a big fan of working with executives and helping them to consider how to validate or paraphrase, how to pick up on verbal or nonverbal cues. In my second podcast, episode 2, I talked about emotional intelligence and the 4 basic tenets of it, and how does an executive or a person develop out his or her emotional intelligence to be able to be very, very empathetic, right? Taking another person's perspective, doing everything that we can to tailor our message to the person in a way that he or she can receive it very quickly. Because I think we have a tendency in our society to listen with the intent to respond, as opposed to listening very, very deeply and empathetically with the intent to help the other person. So if we're good at tailoring communication, we're good at listening very deeply, and then making sure that we're allowing that person, the whole of that person, to communicate with us really effectively. Another thing I want you to consider more physically is color usage. So whether this is on a resume, or whether this is clothing styles that you choose, or business cards that you have printed, or what your website looks like, color usage is really, really critical. There is obviously a lot of meaning to color subconsciously and psychologically. As an example, blue is very much about confidence, trustworthiness, honesty, integrity, competence. It has a lot of that throughout. Orange, another color that I utilize quite a bit, is about future orientation, energy, optimism, moving forward, advancement, innovation, just driving people to the higher and better version of themselves. So what are the colors that you want to be associated with or that you want to have connected to your brand? One of the ways that you can do this, I've read the book a couple of times and continue to use the assessment. Sally Hogshead wrote a book called How to Fascinate, and there are assessments associated with the book that can help you come back with and see what your colors are. And once you know that, then you can start to utilize those colors more meaningfully in a variety of ways throughout your kind of value proposition or your brand. Another thing that we can do when we're out in public and networking with other folks is look at our body language. And so a very quick way to learn about this is to watch the TED Talk that Amy Cuddy had done a few years back, and looking at how we can have specific power poses before we go into a stressful meeting or before we go in to give a presentation or facilitate some sort of an interview or be interviewed. So there are very specific things that you can do to drop your cortisol levels, increase your testosterone levels, to make sure that you walk in the most confident that you possibly can be. Also a big fan of specific breathing techniques, which can help reduce your stress and your heart rate. And then also just basically taking walks and making sure that you're getting tons of oxygen, because that will really help you to have an extra level of confidence as you go in to show other people your purpose in whatever way that might be for you. So another thing here as we think about how do we move to action, obviously we're in a place where building trust, having human attention kind of be the 21st century currency, we have to be very, very trustworthy. And so to be the most authentic version of ourselves possible and documenting our journey, creating content and material that millennials and Gen Z are not going to believe or care about or want to see, we have to become very, very good at what do we do to build trust. And so you can look at Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and some of the things that he has found through his research about how to establish trust. Covey family wrote The Speed of Trust. And then, of course, Stephen Covey had wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Right? There's all these books out there that are about trust and what we can do to establish and build them. So I just think it's really critical that in our society, we're doing everything that we possibly can to build trust, because if someone trusts you, they're going to give you his or her attention, and that is going to then give you the capability to share your mission or your purpose with them more meaningfully down the road. The last thing here I want you to think about when you're moving a lot of this to action is think about what I call the 3-to-1 rule. How do we generate thick value for a person? So I'm just a really super big fan of making sure that I do 3 nice things for a person before I ever ask for anything in return. And so it's really critical that you push that out into the marketplace and constantly do nice things for somebody, whether it's, connect them to a new person in your network, or, write them an email that says thank you, or send them a handwritten card, or, buy them a gift card to a coffee shop. Little things like that matter a ton. Generate value for a person in a way that he or she prefers to receive it. That is going to matter a ton as you build the relationship and allow them to learn about your life's purpose as time passes. So a great way to look at this is Robert Waldinger had done a TED Talk a couple years back in regards to the Harvard study of adult development, basically looking at what makes people live very long, happy, and healthy lives. And what they found through 75 or 80 plus years of studying humans is that what matters most to a long, happy, and healthy life is the depth and quality of the relationships of the people close to us. So I thought for sure it was going to be power, fame, money, success, all these things. It's just not. What matters most is the depth and quality of your relationships. So be out there constantly generating value for people. It's going to drive very meaningful relationships, and whatever your professional goals might be, those relationships are going to be the things that get you to those goals far, far faster. After I've worked with a client, maybe let's say 3 to 6 months after the time that I have with that person ends, I'm really looking for and trying to assess and see through folks in their network, is the person really out there living his or her why? Are they performing, functioning at a very high level throughout the entire day? Are they now able to better communicate more powerfully, right? Are they able to read other people and tailor their message to them? Are they better at managing change, right? Are they able to leverage their natural communication styles or motivators and find comfort in whatever change is coming their way? Is the person more productive, right? Are they able to accomplish more in less time and have really, really succinct clarity about the best course of action? Right? Are they able to better execute on whatever strategy they have set for their organization or for themselves as persons in a very confident way? Are they overcoming fears, right? Have they identified them? Have they confronted them? Have they taken new action to develop those appropriate habits to allow them to confront the fears very, very recurrently? And most important to me is the person engaging his or her community? Are they involved in more civic initiatives, engaging professional associations, volunteering their time with not-for-profits? And so I'm really looking at, after I've gone through this process with a person, 3 to 6 months later, are they doing all of these things better, right? Because ultimately what I would really love is that every person through the process is a phrase that I use pretty often, and it's be the person you needed when you were younger. Through all of their challenges and through all of the processes that they utilize to overcome those challenges, are they now out there leading by example and doing great things for the community where other people want to go through that same process for themselves and truly be there for folks who are going through similar challenges themselves? So as we've had this time in this podcast, we've got to talk a little bit about societal advances, the various things that are happening for many folks in our society, whether it's the rise of entrepreneurship and how we learn from that, whether it's now we're far more accepting of people making mistakes and failing and finding ways to learn lessons through that and grow through that, or whether it's individuality, right? This idea that every person now has a very, very unique value proposition, and how do we allow him or her to have that while growing and developing society, right? It's the old phrase that a rising tide lifts all boats. So let's continue to allow people to be as unique as they want to be, because if we're all doing that and we're all respecting one another, it's far easier for that tide to continue to lift all boats at the same time. So then we looked at the step-by-step process that I utilized with the clients that I serve, and really looking at how do we utilize their behavioral style? How do we look at what motivates them? What are their core values? What were their responses to those past, present, and future questions? And based on that, we designed and said, here are the 6 to 10 patterns or themes that are really critical in this person's life. How can we now create their intention statement, right? Their ambition statement, their value proposition statement, and make sure that we have all of these things so that when they're having to make really tough decisions, we now have the capacity to do that with intuition and also with some facts and data behind us, right? So it's really important that we look at this, because the goal is really truly to get everybody to be as engaged in their work or their life as possible, to be as unique as possible, and to allow any other person around them to essentially do the same, right? It's really critical that we think about how we're all living the hero's journey, and that all challenges can be beneficial if we allow for our mindset to shift about every situation being a win-win situation. So many people get so worried about the perception that other people are going to have of them if they make mistakes or fail. I just don't see the world that way, and I wish that others wouldn't either. All challenges are beneficial. There's a way to allow all scenarios to be win-win. So as we think about this process, I mentioned earlier, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. If you're with 5 people right now that are not allowing you to uncover or live your life's purpose, it might be a very, very good time for you to consider changing the 5 people you spend the most time with so that you can increase the percentage of your day that allows you to live that purpose. As I mentioned earlier, success is the percent of your day spent living your life's mission. It is not the other things that matter to society as it stands today. And I would encourage you to look up Daniel Galati. I think he had an article in Harvard maybe 5 to 10 years ago, and he did some research essentially interviewing retiring CEOs, asking, what were the things that they regretted the most. And the regrets as they came in were, number 1, I wish I wouldn't have worked so hard for money. Number 2, I wish I would have spent more time with my family. Number 3, I wish I would have started my own business. And so we're in a society where Gallup shows that working inside traditional corporate hierarchical structures lead to very low levels of human engagement. And we know that the outcome of that is that people wish they wouldn't have worked for money, had more time for the family, and that they would have uncovered their purpose and started their own business. And so we're moving to a place where finally that gets to be just everyday life. And I'm very, very thankful that's happening. So we've been talking about how to uncover your life's purpose. So thank you for listening to episode number 3 of How to Uncover Your Life's Purpose of Equal Chance to Be Unequal. I am Michael S. Seaver. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, comment, do anything with this podcast on my website, michaelsseaver.com, on my Facebook page, my Instagram page, LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube. Thank you everybody for listening. Go forth and be awesome.